The 1960s gave us cinematic masterpieces, but hidden beneath the glitz of Hollywood's golden age were some truly catastrophic flops. Films so bizarre, so painfully bad they've earned a permanent place in movie infamy. Today, we're diving into the darkest corners of vintage cinema to unearth 12 of the worst movies the 60s ever cursed us with. From radioactive monsters to Martians kidnapping Santa Claus, these films aren't just bad, they're gloriously terrible. The Horror of Party Beach, 1964, where surf rock meets sea monsters and nothing makes sense. In a decade dominated by the British invasion and drive-in flicks, one film dared to mash together two of the strangest genres imaginable, the teen beach party and the creature feature. The result? The Horror of Party Beach, a movie that promised thrills but delivered a masterclass in cinematic confusion. It opens with a group of carefree teenagers dancing on the sands of Connecticut, not California, mind you, but the chilly shores of New England, when a leaking drum of radioactive waste is tossed into the ocean. Seconds later, a mutated sea creature rises from the depths, sporting what appear to be googly eyes and sausages for teeth. This isn't a metaphor. The monster design is so outrageous, so completely detached from fear, that it feels like it stumbled in from a parody and forgot to leave. The acting? Let's just say the sea monster wasn't the only lifeless thing on screen. Characters react to danger as though they've misplaced their car keys, not encountered a murderous mutation from the sea. The scientists speak in technical nonsense, the beachgoers burst into spontaneous song and dance, and the editing cuts scenes so suddenly you'll swear the projectionist fell asleep. Yet, there's a strange charm to it. It's a film that tried to ride the wave of pop culture and got knocked clean off the board. Shot on a shoestring budget with a script seemingly scribbled on a cocktail napkin, The Horror of Party Beach has become a cult classic, not for its scares, but for its glorious failure to deliver them. It's awkward. It's loud. It's impossible to forget for all the wrong reasons. And that's exactly why it kicks off our list. Eegah, 1962, the caveman who grunted his way into movie history for all the wrong reasons. Long before the big-budget blockbusters of Hollywood explored prehistoric life, Eegah tried to bring the Stone Age to suburbia. The result? A bizarre collision of rock music, awkward romance, and one of the most bewildering cavemen ever captured on film. The story begins when a teenage girl named Roxy nearly hits something with her car on a lonely desert road. That something turns out to be Eegah, an 8-foot caveman played by Richard Kiel, who would later redeem himself as Jaws in the James Bond franchise. But here, Kiel lumbers, grunts, and stares blankly through a wig that looks like it was rescued from a mop bucket. As the plot lurches forward, Roxy's father sets out to prove the caveman's existence, only to be captured and brought back to Eegah's cave. What follows is a baffling stretch of cave-side dinners, shirtless strumming of guitars, and long, silent scenes where nothing happens except uncomfortable staring. The dialogue is wooden. The pacing crawls. And the tone flips between romantic drama and accidental comedy, like a film that simply couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Every attempt at suspense is smothered by awkward direction and stilted line readings that make even the most dramatic moments feel like high school rehearsal. But Eegah isn't just a misfire. It's a time capsule of cinematic ambition gone completely off the rails. It tried to ask, what if a caveman survived into modern times? And answer with a question no one wanted, what if he also wanted to date your daughter? There's no real tension, no coherent message, just a slow march through strange dialogue, sandy landscapes, and endless guitar solos. And somehow, it made it to theaters. Eegah may not terrify you, but might just leave you speechless. Manos, The Hands of Fate, 1966, a vacation gone wrong, and a film that never went right. Few films have achieved the kind of legendary failure that Manos, The Hands of Fate has. Created on a dare by a fertilizer salesman from El Paso, this movie has been hailed, not for excellence, but as one of the most inept productions in cinematic history. The plot, if you can call it that, follows a small family, husband, wife, daughter, and their poodle, on a road trip through rural Texas. After getting lost, they stumble upon a strange lodge run by a caretaker named Torgo, a character whose shaking knees, limp walk, and haunting music cue became unforgettable in the worst possible way. Torgo takes care of the place while the master is away, he tells them, and that's the beginning of their nightmare. But the true horror? It's not the master or his mysterious cult of women in white robes. It's the filmmaking itself. Dialogue was dubbed entirely in post-production badly. The editing is choppy. Scenes linger long after the action is over. Characters stand in awkward silence, waiting for their next line. And then there's the camera work. Shots are poorly framed, frequently out of focus, and often too dark to see what's going on. The villain, the master, wears a cape with giant red handprints. He stands motionless for long stretches, commands his minions with theatrical finger-pointing, and delivers lines like he's trying to remember them one word at a time. Manos was shot on a camera that could only record 32 seconds at a time, leading to countless jump cuts and continuity errors. And yet somehow all of it came together into a movie that's still talked about today, not for thrills or storytelling, but for sheer, staggering failure. And that's what makes Manos iconic. It isn't just bad, it's unforgettable. A film made with almost no money, no experience, and no idea what it was doing. And yet it endures as a glorious monument to what happens when ambition far outweighs ability. The Beast of Yucca Flats, 1961, a silent scream in the desert, if only anyone had been awake to hear it. The Beast of Yucca Flats begins with a murder, a mushroom cloud, and a narrator who seems to be reading a completely different script. It's supposed to be a science fiction horror film, but what it becomes is something far stranger. A near-silent wander through the Nevada desert, stitched together with narration, awkward close-ups, and almost no actual dialogue. The plot is almost impossible to follow. A Soviet scientist, played by Tor Johnson, a former wrestler known for his lumbering presence, defects to the United States. But within minutes, he's caught in a nuclear explosion and transformed into a mindless, hulking creature. What happens next? Well, he walks. A lot. Across empty deserts, through dried-out brush, occasionally growling and swatting at the camera. But instead of tension or terror, the film delivers long, uneventful shots of characters doing nothing, running, looking around, pointing. It's like watching a home movie with the sound turned off, except someone added a serious-sounding narrator to describe the action in confusing metaphors. Flag on the moon. How did it get there? He asks, apropos of nothing. To get around audio limitations, most scenes avoid showing characters' lips when they speak, or better yet, avoid having them speak at all. The soundtrack is mostly silence, broken only by the occasional burst of stock music or the endless, droning narration that tries desperately to create suspense where there is none. There are no thrills, no real monsters, just a slow, stumbling walk toward nothing. The Beast of Yucca Flats feels like a dream you can't remember, but somehow, it's still unsettling. It's not just bad, it's baffling. A film made with so little planning, so little coherence, that it feels like an experiment no one meant to finish. And yet it did finish. And that's the real mystery. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, 1960, for the North Pole meets outer space, and nobody wins. It begins like a holiday special, and quickly becomes something else entirely. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians is the story of two Martian children who are too sad to smile. The solution? Kidnap Santa Claus from Earth so he can bring joy to Mars. Yes, really. Green-skinned Martians in cheap felt costumes land on Earth in a flying saucer that looks like it was made from spare kitchen parts. They storm the North Pole, armed with freeze guns and an all-too-serious mission: take Santa. They succeed. And Santa, always jolly, even in captivity, spreads cheer aboard the Martian ship, building toys with robots and cracking corny jokes while Earth's governments panic. Back on Mars, things only get weirder. A villainous Martian named Valdar wants Santa gone for good, convinced he's corrupting Martian youth with laughter and play. Meanwhile, Santa's being kept in a cardboard toy factory with a few Earth children, and a robot that moves like it needs a new battery. The acting is flat. The sets are worse. And the costumes? Imagine a school play with no budget and fewer ideas. Santa's workshop is clearly a single painted wall, and the Martian's makeup is fading by the scene. Yet somehow everyone commits. The actors deliver their lines with absolute seriousness, even as the absurdity grows with every frame. It's a Christmas movie that lacks charm, a sci-fi film that lacks logic, and a comedy that rarely lands a joke. But despite all this, or maybe because of it, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians has become a cult holiday tradition. Not because it's good, but because it's gloriously off the wall. It tried to bring Santa to space. Instead, it launched him straight into the hall of cinematic disaster. They Save Hitler's Brain, 1968. The war was over, but the absurdity had just begun. The title alone promises madness, and They Save Hitler's Brain absolutely delivers. A low-budget thriller that clings to Cold War paranoia while descending into cinematic chaos. It begins with a premise so wild it barely needs explaining. Nazi scientists have preserved Adolf Hitler's brain in a jar, and now they're trying to bring him back. Originally filmed as Madmen of Mandoras in 1963, the movie was padded with nearly 20 minutes of awkward new footage 5 years later. The result? A stitched-together Frankenstein of a film where characters appear and disappear mid-story, hairstyles change between scenes, and the lighting never matches. It's less a narrative and more a fever dream edited with a dull pair of scissors. The plot follows government agents racing to stop a neo-Nazi group from reviving the Führer using his, well, disembodied head. This head, floating in a glass container with a fixed scowl, manages to command armies and inspire fear without ever blinking. How? The film never explains, and frankly it never tries. Dialogue is delivered with all the urgency of a coffee break. Action scenes feel like rehearsals filmed by accident. And the villains, dressed in outdated military uniforms, lurk around cheap sets that look borrowed from a soap commercial. But what truly cements this film's place in cinematic infamy is its complete disregard for logic. Characters appear in one location and magically arrive in another with no explanation. Scenes begin and end without reason. Even the editing seems surprised by where the story goes next. Despite its title, there's very little saving in They Save Hitler's Brain. Not the story, not the pacing, and certainly not the viewer's patience. And yet it lives on as a baffling relic, one that dared to blend political thriller with sci-fi pulp and collapsed spectacularly under the weight of its own nonsense. The Creeping Terror, 1964, it crawled. It growled. It bored audiences to tears. The Creeping Terror is a film that dares to answer a question no one asked. What if a monster attacked very, very slowly? Billed as a horror sci-fi hybrid, it ends up as something far less exciting. An endless parade of awkward narration, confused townsfolk, and a creature that looks like a walking shag carpet. The terror itself is legendary in the worst way. The monster, supposedly an alien, is clearly made of fabric and wires, moving with all the speed and menace of a dropped sleeping bag. It slithers across the screen at a glacial pace, yet somehow catches its victims every time. They don't run. They don't fight. They simply fall down and wait to be consumed. Slowly. Making things worse, the film's audio was tragically lost during production. Rather than re-record dialogue, the filmmakers made a bold decision. They replaced nearly everything with a flat, omnipresent narrator who describes the action as if reading from a police report. Conversations between characters are reduced to lines like, Bobby told the sheriff he saw something strange, while their lips move silently in the background. Scenes drag on forever. People walk into rooms and stare at nothing. Entire chunks of the film feel like filler, as if the director realized they had too little footage and just let the camera roll. All tension is drained by the narrator's monotone delivery and the creature's laughably slow approach. And yet, there's a surreal, almost hypnotic quality to The Creeping Terror. It's a film made without rhythm, logic, or urgency, a story that creeps not just in plot, but in pace. Viewers aren't terrified. They're puzzled, stunned, maybe even a little impressed that something this strange made it to theaters. In the end, The Creeping Terror lives up to its name, not because it scares, but because it lingers. Long after it ends, you're left wondering how something so slow could go so wrong. The incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed-up zombies? 1964, the title is a warning, and the movie doesn't disappoint. With a name like that, you'd expect either a mind-bending masterpiece or a total cinematic breakdown. What you get is the latter. The incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed-up zombies. Isn't just a long title, it's a long, confusing ride through hypnotists, carnival sideshows, musical numbers, and creatures that may or may not be zombies. Directed by and starring Ray Dennis Steckler under the pseudonym Cash Flag, the film follows a slacker named Jerry who visits a seaside carnival with his girlfriend. What starts as a day of rides and palm readings turns into a surreal spiral of mind control, disfigurement, and strange murders. None of it makes much sense, and somehow, that's the point. The so-called zombies are actually disfigured victims of a carnival fortune teller who hypnotizes Jerry and turns him into a killer. Why? The film barely tries to explain. Instead, it fills the runtime with psychedelic dance routines, lounge singers, and endless wandering through foggy corridors. It's as if a musical, a horror film, and a fever dream got mashed together without warning. The acting is painfully stiff. The pacing is slow, and the direction wobbles between amateurish and downright confusing. The camera lingers too long, dialogue gets buried in noise, and the editing often feels like scenes were shuffled by accident. And yet it's not boring. It's weirdly compelling, if only because it constantly makes you ask, what is happening right now? It doesn't scare. It doesn't thrill. But it does deliver something rare, pure, undiluted confusion. The title is long. The movie feels longer. And by the end, you may feel like you've been hypnotized yourself, trapped in a world where plot is optional and logic took the day off. Monster A Go Go, 1965, a monster movie without a monster, and a plot that vanishes into thin air. Some bad movies are forgettable. Monster A Go Go is unforgettable because nothing about it makes sense, including the fact that it was ever released. Originally started by one director and hastily finished years later by another, this film is less a story and more a puzzle missing half its pieces. It begins with a space mission gone wrong. An astronaut disappears during re-entry, and a mysterious, radiation-scarred giant begins roaming the countryside. The assumption? They're one and the same. The problem? No one can prove it, and by the end, even the movie gives up trying. The so-called monster appears in a few fleeting shots, wandering aimlessly in the shadows. He never attacks anyone on screen. He barely interacts with the world. At times, you wonder if he's even real, or just a rumor the filmmakers forgot to cut from the script. Dialogue is delivered with the urgency of a phone call no one wants to make. Characters are introduced and dropped within minutes. Scenes jump locations without explanation, and the editing feels like it was done with a blindfold and a stopwatch. The narration, droning and constant, attempts to fill in the massive gaps, often contradicting what's on screen. And then comes the ending. Abrupt, incoherent, as if the film itself ran out of time. A final voiceover informs us that there was, in fact, no monster at all. The astronaut was found alive in a lifeboat. Everything we just watched? Apparently, nothing happened. It's not a twist. It's a full reset. The ultimate cinematic shrug. Monster A Go Go promises a monster, music, and mayhem, and delivers none of them. What it offers instead is confusion, awkward silence, and a masterclass in how not to finish a film. Or start one. Or write one. The Wild World of Batwoman, 1966, a superhero spoof with no super and barely any hero. Before the world fell in love with superheroes, The Wild World of Batwoman tried to cash in early and spectacularly failed. Released in the same year the Batman TV series premiered, this low-budget mess isn't affiliated with DC Comics in any way. And yet it borrows the name, the tone, and the cape, minus the charm, coherence, or entertainment. The film introduces Batwoman as a mysterious crime fighter, leading an all-female team of agents who wear cocktail dresses, high heels, and inexplicably dance during every mission briefing. Their goal? To stop a villainous organization led by a man named Rat Fink. Yes, Rat Fink. Not a metaphor, not a nickname, just a strange, squeaky-voiced villain in a cheap suit. The plot involves stolen hearing aids that double as mind control devices, mad scientists in cluttered labs, and a gang of goons who appear more confused than dangerous. Batwoman herself spends more time laughing at her own lines than fighting crime. Her powers are never explained. Her costume seems to change scene to scene. And her greatest weapon? Sarcastic commentary and long, slow-motion arm gestures. Visually, the movie is a mess. Scenes are poorly lit, poorly framed, and stitched together with jump cuts that feel more like hiccups than transitions. Every action sequence looks like it was choreographed on the spot. Even the stock music seems to give up halfway through scenes. And just when it couldn't get more bizarre, the film ends with a courtroom scene that doubles as a costume party and includes a giant gorilla suit for reasons never addressed. The Wild World of Batwoman isn't just a parody, it's a collapse. A film that tried to ride the wave of superhero hype without a surfboard, a script, or a clue. It has since gained infamy thanks to Mystery Science Theater 3000, but even they had trouble making sense of it. This isn't the Batwoman we needed, or wanted, or asked for. It's a wild world, alright, just not one you'll want to revisit. Zonter, The Thing from Venus, 1966, he came from Venus, with a plan, a voice, and a rubber bat. Zonter, The Thing from Venus is the kind of movie that takes itself incredibly seriously, and that's exactly why it's so unintentionally hilarious. A remake of the already bad It Conquered the World from the 50s, Zonter is a made-for-TV sci-fi film that promised interplanetary intrigue and delivered a papier-mâché alien hiding in a cave. The story centers on Dr. Keith Ritchie, a scientist who believes he's made contact with a peaceful alien being from Venus. He's wrong. Very wrong. Zonter, a creature who speaks telepathically with the voice of a middle-aged philosopher, arrives on Earth not to help, but to enslave humanity using bat-like creatures that fly into people's necks and make them mind-controlled zombies. These bat creatures, by the way, are clearly made of rubber. They wobble mid-flight, bounce off targets, and are often visibly thrown into frame by someone just off camera. Watching them attack is like seeing a Halloween decoration with ambition. The pacing of Zonter is a slow burn without the burn. Conversations stretch on endlessly about science, trust, and alien philosophy. Characters talk in monotone about global collapse, all while standing in kitchens, hallways, and the same 3 rooms. You can practically hear the echo of the empty budget. Then there's Zonter himself. When he's finally revealed, he's a wrinkled, horned creature with crab arms, glowing eyes, and the mobility of a beanbag chair. He lives in a cave, gives vague commands, and is ultimately defeated in a scene so abrupt it feels like the film simply ran out of tape. Despite its title, Zonter never feels like a real threat. He's not terrifying. He's barely visible. What Zonter is, however, is a shining example of 1960s sci-fi at its most ambitious and least prepared. It tried to explore big ideas about trust, control, and the dangers of blind belief. What it gave us instead was a lecture in a basement and a monster that couldn't chase you if it tried. The Fat Spy, 1966, a beach party without a clue, a plot, or a reason. By the mid-1960s, teen beach movies were everywhere, sun-soaked, music-driven romps filled with surfboards, bikinis, and bubblegum pop. The Fat Spy tried to ride that wave and wiped out before it ever hit the shore. Set on a supposedly deserted island that's somehow full of teenagers, the story revolves around a secret fountain of youth, a greedy cosmetics tycoon, her overdramatic daughter, a pair of bumbling spies, and a whole lot of musical numbers that stop the plot cold. If that sounds confusing, it is. And yet, everyone in the film seems completely unfazed by it. Phyllis Diller plays the eccentric villainess with wild hair and louder clothes, delivering lines as if she's in a completely different movie. Jane Mansfield appears as her daughter, oozing glamour in scenes that barely relate to the rest of the cast. There are also twin brothers, one good, one evil, though neither makes much sense, and both vanish when convenient. Despite the title, there's very little spying going on, and absolutely nothing fat about it, either. The humor falls flat, the pacing drags, and the direction feels like it was done with a beach towel over the camera. Songs appear at random, dance numbers erupt out of nowhere, and nobody seems to question why, or how any of it is happening. Visually, it's sun-bleached and empty, with wide shots of dancers spinning in sand for minutes on end. The dialogue is forgettable. The editing is sloppy. And the plot, what little there is, drifts off like a lost inner tube. But what really seals the Fat Spy's place on this list is how hard it tries to be cool, hip, and funny, only to land in the uncanny valley of unwatchable. It's not just a bad film. It's a tone-deaf echo of a genre that was already wearing out its welcome. If beach party movies were a craze, The Fat Spy was The Hangover. A strange, sunburned send-off to a decade that gave us both brilliance and bafflement on screen. And there you have it, 12 unforgettable missteps from a decade that gave us some of the greatest films in history, and a few that defied all explanation. These movies may have missed the mark, but in doing so, they carved out their own strange legacy, reminders that even failure can be fascinating. If you enjoyed this journey through the weird and the woeful, don't forget to subscribe for more dives into cinema's most curious corners. There's plenty more to explore, from hidden gems to glorious disasters. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next reel.